Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Good afternoon. We're here today with Ben Van Dyke, who is one of our candidates for City Council. He's running at large. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
And we'd like for you, first off, to give us a little information about yourself, where you came from, how you got here, and why you're running.
Yeah, absolutely. I am born and raised in Grand Junction. I am a fourth generation Grand Junction resident. Going back all the way to my great-grandpa. My great-grandpa is one of the founding members of the sheriff's posse here locally. My family, well, I guess starting kind of with my childhood, growing up in Grand Junction, went to school at Grand Junction High School, was fortunate enough to play football and wrestle, and it's just a great place to grow up. You know, really a sense of community that was really special. Having the freedom to ride my bike from one end of town to the other without my parents really being able to worry about it or even contact us. So back then, you know, it was you'd hit an occasional payphone if you got a flat tire or something like that and needed picked up. But it was just a safe, great place to grow up, you know, riding our bikes out to Mezzoland on Horizon Drive to play putt-putt golf and then going over to Burger King and get a shake. You know, the freedom to kind of roam as a child around here was pretty neat. After high school, I went up to Greeley for a little while and went to school in Greeley for a year, and then ended up coming back home to go to CMU. When CMU brought their wrestling team back, I tried to come back and wrestle for CMU. Did that for about a year and a half, and then left to join the trades. I worked for an electrician or a few different electrical companies for 6 or 7 years from there on, and really kind of grew a little bit of love for the trades as well. I'm a very mechanical person, so being able to put my hands on something is rewarding on a lot of different levels for me, figuring out problems and working my way through problems. Around 2008, when the residential housing kind of crashed a little bit.
Major crash,
Exactly. I was working up in Vail and Aspen around then, and it just, before that, it was really lucrative. After that, it just didn't really make sense to do it anymore. There were so many people looking for work that it drove the salaries down so much in the construction industry that I ended up leaving and coming back to work for my dad at that point in time at the Vans Car Washes, where I worked for him for 13 years, just running the car washes and the day-to-day operations, working with my dad. And in the early years, my grandpa was still around a little bit too. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But in 4 years ago, kind of right in the peak of COVID, my wife and I decided to buy the business. So we bought the business from my parents and have just been kind of more or less weathering the storm kind of ever since then. The first few years were really great. Business growth was huge. It was incredible. Then this last year's been a little more interesting. In, I guess it would have been fall of 23, we found out through the Daily Sentinel that the Resource Center was going to be next door to us. So in 2023, we kind of started to, you know, it was 2023 when 2023 is when it was announced. 2024 when it kind of came to fruition, if I can remember that correctly. But we kind of got out ahead of it and kind of we're trying to be proactive with the situation. We wanted to figure out what the impacts on the neighborhood were going to be, you know, how people were going to get in and out of the area, if people were going to allow to be hanging around the facility, loitering around the facility throughout the day. One of the big things I was concerned about was the low barrier entry. That was something I had asked a lot of questions about, and it was, you know, it sounds worse than it is, but we actually are going to be watching who's coming in and out of the facility and don't worry, it's
And I think you need to say, what is a low barrier? What did they mean by low barrier?
yes.
And also, how did that affect, you're right across the street from where it is and your areas around the resource center.
Yeah. I learned really quick that low barrier meant no barrier. It was a free-for-all, come and go as you please. Some people did their drugs inside the facility, inside the yard of the facility, not inside the tent, I don't think. I think they were pretty good about watching inside the tent. But I don't think they ever had the staff to even watch the yard. So that became pretty evident pretty fast that the narcotics being used out there were pretty potent just by the smells that were wafting our way most of the day. And then another thing that we were seeing is that, the drug dealers would either sit on the corner or their vehicles would be on the side of the road, and people would come in and out of the facility and visit these different dealers and get what they need, and then they'd just go right back into the facility without any sort of bars or people watching out for these kind of things. And to me, when you're harboring activity like that, you're condoning it. And when you're doing all this in the name of keeping these people safe, it just doesn't really feel like you're actually keeping anybody safe when you are, taking somebody that is prone to relapse and recidivism, that is making the steps to get back on the right track, and the first hit's free on the corner. That becomes a situation that somebody can't ever really truly break. And when the people that are actually supposed to be helping condone that kind of activity, there's no real hope. There's no real help. I know that the attitude and the demeanor that kind of had spread around the resource center had spread to the Catholic outreach as well, because people that had followed rules and been able to kind of coexist in this situation for so long, all of a sudden had this alternative across the street where they didn't have to follow rules. So they could come over to the day center and act however they wanted, and if they got kicked out, they had an alternative. So all of a sudden, the volunteers and their employees were actually dealing with much more chaos and commotion as well, just because that standard had kind of been broken. And it's really disappointing, because a lot of those are relationships that took years and years to build. People that had been on housing lists for over a year or 2 years that were so close to making that next step to breaking that cycle, that because we've condoned a certain type of activity at this location, those people no longer are going to break that cycle, or at least not anytime soon. We talk about wanting to help this population. To me, helping the population is giving them pathways up out of that lifestyle, not creating ways to make it more comfortable to live that way. We have to create programs that focus on education, job training, job placement, have shelters that have rules against drugs, alcohol, violence, weapons. You have to have this certain standard, and the money that we've spent on this resource center, even if it's Homeward Bound, Homeward Bound does a good job with their overnight shelters. I'm not, a lot of people think that I've kind of gotten anti-Homeward Bound generally. I think Homeward Bound just tried to do a little too much with what they actually had the ability to do. But if they were to focus on those overnight shelters, if we put even a portion of this money into those overnight shelters, then when we break up these camps and these people ask us, where do we go? We can have a solution and have an alternative for them. When you go to the park and somebody's camped in the park and they say, where do we go? We can say, hey, we've got beds. You're going to have to follow the rules of the facility. Otherwise, we're going to trespass you. It puts it in a situation where the police can actually do their job, where they're not having to make judgment calls constantly because they're just shuffling these people around. Some of which don't want a place to go. Others of which would love an opportunity of having somewhere else to go. But to give them that opportunity and to actually point them in the right direction, and if not, say, well, you can't be here, so we're going to trespass you and we're ticketing you today. That's just how it's going to be. But this whole situation of just bouncing people around the community from one private property to the other, it's not really a sustainable cycle for anybody, I don't think, or is breakable for anybody.
And you feel like it's also made the downtown area more dangerous
Oh, absolutely.
for the residents and the homeless
Absolutely.
people. And
You know, we used to deal, so I think most business owners in the downtown area, except for those like completely and totally adjacent to Whitman Park, most of us that have a little bit of separation, the homeless problem has always been a problem, but it was more of a quirky problem than it was an unsafe problem. You know, I rarely never, I mean, it was really rare that I would ever deal with violence. Really rare that I couldn't ever de-escalate an issue just by talking to somebody on my property. You know, in the past, it's extremely rare that we trespass somebody. We have trespassed more people in the last year than we've trespassed probably in the history of the business.
and what do you do when you trespass them?
You know, what we typically will do is we usually try to contact the person first and give them the opportunity. You know, we understand with our location, we get people passing through all the time. If someone's passing through and they're not bothering anybody and they're, you know, we look at that, you know, that's harmless. We completely understand why you're cutting through our lot and saving yourself the time to go around. The things that we have more problem with are, you know, customers being asked for money, customers being asked for cigarettes. We've had a lot more of people that are high. Between between the fentanyl and the heroin and then, you know, some of the methamphetamine that we're seeing, you get a lot of different behavioral issues that come with that stuff. A lot of them, you know, we've had people that, you know, you see these videos that these people look like zombies and they're stuck. We've had people like that they're just stuck in our parking lot, and you confront them and then, you know, they are able to pull together some sort of awareness and they're very hostile at that point. It's probably been 2 months ago, my employee had just bought himself his first new vehicle ever. I'm very proud. Great little truck. He pulled into the car wash, parked there, and a guy climbed onto his hood and for about 20 minutes screamed at him through the window. He called me and said, "What do you think I should do?" He said, "Can you call Jody?" Because that's usually our go-to. Is
Yeah.
we call Jody and Jody will come over and diffuse the situation for us. But luckily,
And she's so nice.
yeah, PD was over there already dealing with somebody else. I actually think they had been called for the same guy and were over there. And they had walked up behind the guy while he was on my employee's car. You know, we have customers that have been lifelong customers that have not only been my customer, but were my parents' customers and my grandfather's customer as well, who basically just avoid the area and tell us they won't come down anymore. Some of them which will come to our other location, which is great. You know, I've had a lot of customers catch me over at our other location. They're like, "I'm so happy to see you here. We wanted you to know we still wash at your car wash. We just don't go downtown anymore." And, you know, I think that's when the reality struck. You know, seeing it all in the first few months was one thing because I knew what it was and I knew how the perception was going to kind of change on it. But when my customers actually started telling me that they felt unsafe on my property, the reality really sunk in. And that was a helpless feeling that, you know, this is a business that my grandfather founded. My father just poured his soul and energy into. And an area that we've been a part of, you know, we've been at that site. The building's been moved a few times, but in that site since the early 90s, we were over by the courthouse when the courthouse was built, and then they moved the building there. Before that, we were on First and Grand. That building's been moved around a few times. But we love that area. You know, it's always kind of been an underserved part of our downtown, but we've always, you know, it's where we've wanted to be. The year of the resource center was the first time I'd ever considered selling that property. That, you know, car washes are really expensive infrastructure to build because there's so much in the ground between floor heat, plumbing, sewer. There's just a lot in the ground, so it's a really hard thing to walk away from. But we considered, you know, it's like, well, maybe we put this out on the market and we just look towards the future about what we want to do, you know, whether it be in Grand Junction or elsewhere. And luckily with city council kind of stepping in and putting a little bit of pressure eventually on the resource center to change operations. And I give Faith Rodriguez a lot of credit from United Way. She's stepped in and she's put some things in place that have made some big differences. So overall it has cleaned up, and I think it's moving in the right direction overall. I mean, we still see the people come out and they come around the corner and hit their pipe, and then they hurry back in, or do those things. But it's cleaned up, so we're hopeful that we're moving in the right direction. And then having that April 15th date, that we'll see if that becomes a solid date or not to look forward to, is great as well. Because the original 2-year lease was going to leave us with another year. So it would have been April 15th of 2026 when they were going to be gone. And I don't know if people...
Business could have stood it, right?
A question for you then, back to kind of city council then. How much money do you think the city council ought to be pouring into this particular?
I've got a real problem with that as well. We have such a finite amount of resources, and we have such a finite amount of resources that we can use towards helping the unhoused. We can't just open our checkbook and write a check every time somebody calls and asks. We need to know how dollars are being spent, how effective they are, if we're putting them in the right place. And instead, I think we've ended up with this situation where, because Whitman Park was closed, we had to act, and we had to find this solution to make the public feel a little better about our actions. So we acted so quick that we didn't really take a moment to step back and realize what we were doing. And then we kind of ended up with this sunk cost fallacy where it's, well, we've already invested so much into this, we can't turn back now. We've got to push ahead and find solutions. And we knew this was going to be a problem from the start, but we just wanted to mold it, and it's an experiment and a project, so we've got to move it in the right direction. And I think in a lot of ways on that front, we're losing our taxpayers' ability to trust us.
Right. Or the ability to afford us.
Oh,
I mean,
well.
it's not only trust, it's afford.
And there's so many things that we're paying for now that we're pretty iffy on trying to get finished, let alone trying to pour more into a resource center, which at this point is not working.
No, absolutely.
We should leave it to our nonprofits to take care of, or at least that's my opinion.
I agree.
And the nonprofit said we did have something. We, like you said, there wasn't as big a problem before they built the resource center, and it was kind of one of those that they all worked together pretty well and had different things, and
Yep. And it
and
worked.
then you decided when the city council did this, what was their experience in recognizing what would happen? Were they just looking, do you think, at, well, here's a plan, this is what it looks like, and look at all the little shrubs and how nice this looks, and everybody is really happy? Have they been down there themselves and said, is this working? Have I sat in the resource center to see, or have I sat on the corner? Have I gone personally, me going out to you and seeing how's it working, and asking people, how's it working for you?
Yes. So when we started finally getting a little bit of movement from city council, city staff actually went over there and spent some time in the resource.
Good.
And they found that resources weren't actually being rendered. That was one of the main things they came up with. What they were understaffed, they didn't have the ability. And that's kind of our answer for everything. They're understaffed and need more funding. That's the solution. But the resources weren't really truly being rendered, that it was essentially a hangout. And it was, in all honesty, to me, it was an attempt to hide the population behind the walls of a tent. We thought that if we put this giant tent here, that everybody would use it and be inside of it, and Main Street would clean up, and South Avenue would clean up, and the railroad would clean up. And it's not really how things work, because you end up with a certain amount of population, for instance, the Whitman Park group, who they don't really want to be watched. They don't really want to be, I used to talk to them quite a bit, and I'd ask them, why do you guys hang out on the east side of the park and not on the west side of the park? Or, excuse me, the other side around the west side of the park and not on the east side of the park. And one of their responses was, well, the cameras on the police station can see us on that side, so we hang out over here. Because they don't want to be supervised, they don't want to be watched, they don't want to be told what to do. And that was one of the things I had told the city and Homeward Bound in the planning stages of the resource center was, the Whitman Park crew will not use this facility. And they didn't understand that. They said, why would they not? It's low barrier, they can come in here and do. I said, they don't trust, a lot of these people don't trust the service providers. They don't trust the city. They don't trust the police department. And they think that they're all in cahoots together, even though they're really not. Mm-hmm. But they don't want to go to a place where they feel like they're going to be picked up for something, or, so that's exactly why they opened the resource center, and they closed, or Whitman Park closed. They moved to the next park over. They opened up the resource center, and no one left Emerson Park. All the people stayed in Emerson Park until they closed Emerson Park to start building the construction on the resource center, or on the skate park, excuse me.
And then they just moved up to
exactly the Desert
street.
Vista.
Yeah.
Yep. And bumping them up and down and all around town, and it's it was just such a flawed approach from the beginning, and it was so rushed that I don't think anybody really stood up and asked the important questions of, like, why aren't we leasing a facility, a warehouse facility? Why aren't we spending this $1 million buying a facility to where if this experiment fails, we at least hold the real estate? Or with the leasing, we can walk away. We've spent $200,000 in the year, but we can walk away from it and say this project was a failure, or, it needs to be changed. Instead of this, we were in such a hurry to get it there. We bought this tent. Now we're realizing the long-term viability of the tent isn't there because it's too expensive to heat and cool. The floor is failing. I mean, it's not.
Do we really buy that facility, or is that leased?
The tent
itself
is purchased.
Okay.
The city of Grand Junction bought the tent and signed the tent over to Homeward Bound. So Homeward Bound owns the tent. So when they find a new site, from what I've been told, Homeward Bound will be responsible for removing the tent. And I'm not sure where it happens. From what I've been told, that the quote for removing the tent itself is $60,000 just to break the tent down, and that's not to set it back up.
And Homeward Bound says they don't have any money as it is.
Yeah.
So are they going to come back to the city and say, $60,000, please, or however much it's going to take at that particular time?
That would kind of be my guess. And it's not my expertise, and I definitely don't know how these nonprofit organizations operate. I just look at how the Joseph Center operates, and I look at how Catholic Outreach operates, and I just question, why are they able to do it without taxpayer dollars on the vast majority? I mean, I know the city gave, I think it was 15% of the total construction cost for Mother Teresa's place. And basically, I think it was in the land and in the demolition and the asbestos remittance, or whatever they would call that, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Abatement is what
abatement.
it's called.
That is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Abatement was the word I was. You wouldn't remit that.
Never mind.
And it's the same, and it's just the same situation. And then the city likes to stand up there, and we take a lot of credit for the units that Catholic Outreach has produced. But instead, let's celebrate these service providers. Let's not stand in their glow and say, look what we've done to help you. Let's facilitate. Let's help them. Let's figure out, why does Catholic Outreach operate on private funds and donations, and try to duplicate that. I think we have a strong private sector here in Grand Junction, but we also have a community that cares. People, if there's a real need and there's a real way of kind of finding solutions to that, people will get riled up and do things about that.
Right.
And I think when you put that more on the private sector and you put that more on the community, you see that the community is going to rise up and actually solve these problems in ways that are efficient for everybody.
Well, and if they see that what's being done is being successful in solving the problem.
Yes.
If the idea is, instead of saying we're going to do this and this is our decision, this is our vision, and you didn't involve those people in the vision.
Yes.
And say, we want to use your money to create this, and they're going, well, but.
Well, and we have these community meetings and these stakeholder meetings, and we forget, it's city staff, they're being paid to be at these meetings, to be at these seats and these tables. These community members like myself, business owners, residents, we are not. We are at these tables because we care about our community and we're concerned about the direction we're moving on. And when you don't take the input from these different committees and these different community members, it's so disrespectful to the time that they've invested in our community. I mean, we have some incredibly intelligent people in this community. As I've seen a lot of them on your guys' podcast, you know, between Keith Ellers, Shannon Seacrest, you know, Hogan, these guys are incredibly intelligent, and we don't always have to pay a third-party consultant to tell us what these guys already know.
Man.
You know?
We say
Lisa
that
and I have
every
been saying
time.
this.
Yes,
Please.
You know, if you want to know how the best way to help the unhoused, let's go to the people that are doing it the best in our valley or in other communities and speak with them.
Right.
You know, Catholic Outreach wasn't consulted about the resource center.
No.
They were asked if they wanted to
Be part of it.
but they weren't consulted about it. You know, and then the fact that they didn't want to be part of it, and you slap it in their neighborhood and you put it right across the street from
Their resources.
their resources that are doing the exact same thing. It just puts this competitive aspect on the funds that it doesn't really seem like we're moving the right direction with the right heart of actually helping the unhoused. It kind of puts it in this whole competing for the city's admiration that, you know, we want the tax dollars, so we'll take them, we can do this, we got this, instead of actually really helping people and lifting people up.
So we're going to give you the magic wand, and you're on city council now, and you've got a majority. You're just so lucky. So what would your first step be in solving this problem for the community?
You know, as far as the unhoused, I think getting people together like Mona Highline, Jody Viscani, Sister Karen, I mean, even Housing Authority, you know, different organizations that Laurel from not Habitat for Humanity, not
Right.
Homeward Bound, you know, people that are working in this space that actually know what it takes and have a realistic view that we can't help everybody, so let's start looking at who we can actually help, that who we can help and how much resources those people are going to take. We are always going to have the Catholic Outreach to feed those that need feeding, and we don't want anyone to starve or freeze. Nobody wants that. But if the city's going to put resource into it, we need to focus our resources on lifting people up and supporting the people that are doing it the best, getting behind these service providers that really know what they're doing and saying, how can we support you? You know, what could you do with a little more real estate? What could you do with this or this? Or basically, how can we, you know, even like zoning things, how can we change some zoning so that you're able to, you know, accomplish this with this facility? You know, there's things like, you know, Dr. Amos, you know, I think some of the ideas she had with her hangout, I think she had a lot of really good ideas. I don't think the location was good. And I don't think the location was good at all. I think something like that in a different site that's a little bit removed from residential and retail, you know, we can get behind these people that are finding ways to do it without the city's money and get out of their way and really make it easier for them to serve this population. You know, we can lease real estate cheap. You know, Grand Junction loves holding real estate. We can make cheap real estate leases to these organizations that have stipulations that, hey, you know, if you affect the community around you, you're done. We're not going to put up with it, and we're not going to have it's going to be a really low tolerance. So we're going to move these things along really quick. And I think you get community buy-in then too, because it's like,
or if you ask the community, you actually go out and ask the community and say, these are ideas that we have that have been proposed. We want you to know about it, because I think that's a lot of the lack of trust is people don't know about it. If you don't take the paper, you don't see it, and you don't even
if you
know.
don't read about it or hear about it on television, if you have the time to listen to television,
yes.
You just don't get what's going on.
Right.
Or hold a stakeholder meeting and tell every stakeholder why they're wrong as they speak. You know, these are business owners, these are community members. You know, typically a business owner won't come forward and say, I'm hurting. You know, we're prideful people. We want our businesses to be successful. We want our businesses to look successful, even if they're not.
Right.
We put that foot forward. So when businesses are coming forward and saying, we're hurting, what you're doing is hurting our revenue, and you don't take that at heart and you say, well, I'm sorry, but we're waiting on data,
Yeah.
We got to wait on some data.
Between consultants and data,
It
we're
is.
in
And,
trouble.
one of my biggest things is, why is community input not data?
Mm-hmm.
Why does that not hold a little more weight in all of this?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have been questioning too. It seems like that on many things, like 4th and 5th Street, for instance, all the data's there. I mean, Lisa and I see tons of it every day. It's not what the city sees,
Yes.
but we see the real-time data.
Yeah.
And it's totally different than what the council's messing with.
Yeah.
So what would be your idea of that?
I feel like an elected official's responsibility is to actually lead for the constituents that elected them.
Mm-hmm.
So if your general population is telling you we hate something, we don't want it, it's your responsibility to pivot and to move forward. And that also creates, like we've talked about before, it creates that level of respect with your population to where next time you say, hey, we've got an idea, your public's probably going to listen. Instead of this situation now where 4th and 5th Street, where, I mean, for all better terms, you've kind of shoved it down our throats and told us it's for the better good, while we're all saying, hey, this is hurting my business, this is making it harder to go downtown. People are telling us they're avoiding downtown. The data that you're actually using to show downtown visitation is slightly flawed and confusing, because it is showing a drop in visitorship for a vast majority of the day, most days, but then we're ending up with some like weird spikes and peaks that are creating these false ideas of an increased visitorship to our downtown. And it's funny, I went into Brown Shoes the other day and I was speaking with them, and they said, they closed off the 4th and 5th Street entrances to our parking lot. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize that. They're like, and it's a one-way parking lot, so one car pulls in and goes the wrong way. It bottlenecks the entire parking lot and no one can get in and out. They're like, we have people all day long complaining about it, or telling us that they used to come in that way and now they come in off Main, but they went off Main, but the traffic coming off Main was so backed up because of 4th and 5th Street that they just avoid the area pretty much entirely. And that has to count for something.
Right.
I mean, when the community cries out for help, it takes a lot. We're so comfortable in this world nowadays that I think most of us stay pretty quiet most of the time until we absolutely have to talk.
Until we're hurting.
Yes.
Until we're hurting.
And people are hurting.
Or sometimes I've heard someone say, well, I'm not going to say anything about it because it's an inconvenience, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be an inconvenience.
Yep.
And I think it's disingenuous to always use this safety. It's safer. Well, like Grand, for instance, it's 4 lanes. You've got 2 going each way. There's no reason why it can't be 35 miles an hour. Why? What different? We got them down to 32 because they were up at 37. And I'm like, maybe you can't make a little bubble around everybody and make everybody feel safe all the time. Maybe they need to take some responsibility for themselves, and if they call it an accident because they didn't purposely go do it. That's when you have an accident, you're not going, oh gee. And I know CDOT's like that. Well, we don't want to build a road where there's more than one death. I'm sorry, there's going to be people that get on a road and for whatever reason have an accident.
Exactly.
And you're trying to control it so much that I don't think people see that. They feel it, but they're not sure that their desire for safety is taking people's freedom.
Absolutely.
And it's taking their freedom to have a great business. It's taking their freedom to use the streets as they want. And
we've lost common sense.
And that's what you're running on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and not only common sense, but we're so eager to take things out of the hands of the voter nowadays. I've noticed it's, these impact fees. It's, we can call it a fee and we don't have to call it a tax, and then all of a sudden we take it out of the hands of the voter. And it's, well, if we've created a better relationship with our voter, maybe we wouldn't have to do that. If our voter trusted us, maybe we wouldn't have to do that. If we felt like our tax dollars were actually being used in the correct way, I think most people get behind projects that they actually believe in. It's when you create this environment of we know best. I mean, I'm sorry, I hate to say it, it's an elitist mentality in a lot of ways, because it doesn't matter what the community has to say, we know best. We can see the future. Don't worry, it's all going to work out. We know best.
So what are you thinking? Like the other night, there was this meeting with the home builders and realtors and city council, and everybody got to sit basically at a round table and discuss. What would be the possibilities of city council doing that with other things that come up? Resource Center, 4th and 5th Streets, things like that that the public could actually have input on.
I have high hopes with Mike Bennett. I think Mike Bennett wants to bring the community in. I think he really cherishes the community input. I think that these meetings are going to change tone a little bit. We saw some of it with the Resource Center towards the end here, where we were able to have these workshops that actually included city council. Some of them, the format's really wonky. They'll do one with city staff to where you can have dialogue with city staff, and then they have their next workshop meeting where city staff presents to city council, but there's no dialogue from the stakeholders in that situation. So getting to a point where the stakeholders can actually have dialogue with city council, I think is super important. And for city staff to be able to just kind of sit back and watch it sometimes, I think is important as well.
Right now, what we're seeing is everything is just cut and dried from city staff right to council. Council votes, that's it.
Yep.
There doesn't seem to be any input put in other than from whatever resources that the city staff chooses to get. And it isn't always correct information.
It's from what I can tell, is they're often offered 3 different flavors of vanilla.
Right.
And you get to choose your vanilla, but these are the vanilla flavors that we'll be having today. I give Cody Kennedy a lot of credit because he does ask deeper questions that dive in a little more and try to bring out the reality of the situation, where I think most of our counselors, I would even say a few others are pretty good about trying to ask questions at least and be involved. But I think we need a really strong council to direct staff to give us a true non-biased approach.
There you go.
Right.
The council directs staff, not the staff directing council.
Yes.
Such a difference.
Absolutely. And I think I do have high hopes with the new city manager. I really do think that he's got a good start, and I think he's trying to establish that culture.
If he just doesn't become jaded in the meantime.
Yeah, and that's difficult too.
It is.
I mean, that's extremely difficult. And, I've got high hopes. The stakeholders in this community, when you have people like Brian Bray who are sitting in that meeting speaking, the Bray family has been responsible for a lot of real estate changing hands in this town.
Yes, it has.
For a lot of years. When you dismiss what that man has to say to you, you're hurting yourself.
Right.
This is valuable information that these people can bring forward.
Well, and even some of the stakeholders that I think they totally ignore is when they had the meeting for 7th Street and they were talking about the businesses and the people who live there, and I'm going, the other stakeholders are all of us who drive on 7th Street. It is the entire community. It is not just this small group.
Yeah.
And you've got to make it in a way that those people feel heard too. It's, whatever it is. If I'm a homeowner and I'm looking for a first-time home, I'm a stakeholder in this impact fees.
Yes.
And for you to say, well, we're going to do this, and here's our consulting group that is showing us now, this is how much it is per person, per 1,000, and how much they're going to, that's not helpful to anybody.
Well, and even the terminology used behind these new impact fees I find a little bit disgusting. The maximum allowable defendable by law. Well, that doesn't really take into account the fact that some people can't afford to buy their groceries in our town right now.
Right.
And that the cost of living is ridiculously high in this valley. And it's not just these people that we're trying to help with the affordable housing bracket. This is middle income people as well.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
All we're doing is making it more expensive for those people to live in the name of making it less affordable or cheaper for this small group. Instead of focusing on how do we make this a cheaper place to live for everybody, how do we make homes more affordable, how do we cut the red tape so that we can get building going in this community, so that we can fill this 3,000 home deficit and actually see the prices come down a little bit.
And where does that number come from, that 3,000? I've wondered that over and over and over. Who are, because if you live here, you're living somewhere. You're not homeless.
I would love to know that as well. I'm not sure if that's a state number or if that was part of the unhoused survey that they had done in 2023, because that's kind of when that number started to really pop up the most.
I find it odd because after that point, there were several different buildings that opened up for housing, but yet the number remains the same.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Well, and you drive around town and the amount of apartments being built is different than it's ever been in the Grand Valley. You know, just from somebody that's been here my entire life. Usually an apartment complex gets built and it's like a 12-unit, 6-unit. It's more of a multiplex than it is.
Right.
Now we're seeing these buildings it feels like a Denver type construction boom where
Chicago tenement.
Yeah, I mean, 200 units, 150 units. These are adding substantial inventory to the market. I do believe that the deficit is there, just because I believe that the free market will kind of control the prices. And if there was a lot of vacancy, I think a lot of these apartments would be dropping prices and it would become more affordable.
Well, and I think you're right that I think the single-family homes, the starter homes, are the ones that need to be placed. I think those are the people that are actually out of homes. You cannot have a starter home that's $350,000 and above. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, and especially in the name of transitional housing as well. We are so big on this transitional housing piece right now. But to call it transitional housing seems kind of dishonest if there's nothing to transition to. So you're not really creating transitional housing at that point. You're kind of creating a project. Because if you're not moving people up and through, there's no transition. That transition never is actually taking place. And so how are you getting that person in the position where they are coming up with that down payment for their first home?
Right.
And the problem being is that those that have the rentals that are getting paid by that rent don't want those people leaving. They want that income. So, I mean, that's another catch-57.
No, it's absolutely true.
I always say catch-57.
22.
And it is 22.
Yep.
It's
I don't
twice
know where
as
I
good.
Heinz 57 maybe. I don't know what the deal is, but anyway.
I like it. We'll go with it.
So when do you, I'm going to ask you your 5 top priorities for what you'd like to see done on City Council. And another question is, how long do you think this has been going on? And how long will it take to adjust to something that's common sense?
The optimist in me says, a few little changes here. I think that we can really move in the right direction. The other side of me, I think it might probably take a few cycles to make some changes to really
Impact.
And nothing against the people that are in there now, but there's definitely a
culture.
A culture. They found their groove in what they do, and I think it might take a little bit of new blood turning over to actually kind of change some of that. I'm hopeful. I've met a few of the different people that are running for some of the different spots, and just from the dialogue that I've had with them up to this point, I'm hopeful that if some of us are able to kind of be injected into some of the current culture, that maybe some of us can kind of bridge these gaps a little bit and bring people back together, that we are able to kind of show these counselors that, hey, none of this is personal. It all feels extremely personable because not personable. It all feels extremely personal because you all care. You know, you all might have a different way of going about it, or think we have a different route or different expectations, but every single person up there truly cares about what they're doing and thinks that they're doing the best. So if we're able to somehow bridge that gap and bring people together and open that dialogue back up again, to move together and realize, hey, like, we all aren't going to win our battles, but if we can meet somewhere in the middle and shake hands and walk away and smile and be able to do it again the next day, those are the real victories. That's when the Grand Junction really wins. When we get caught up in these situations where we're defending character, defending stance, without really talking about the meat and potatoes of the situation, we don't really get anywhere. We end up with a 4-hour meeting that everyone leaves with high blood pressure and angry. And that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the counselors. It's not good for the city.
Great for the physicians, however.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and we just can do a little better. And I don't know that I'm fully the answer for that. I would hope that I can kind of move things in the right direction and help mend some wounds and heal some things up, and that the new people kind of coming in can inject a little bit of life and steer things in the right way. I think a little bit of freshen up in any way right now is needed. I think that we've kind of gotten to this weird stalemate between a lot of the different members of council and staff, to where these personal issues have made it difficult to actually work through the real problems that Grand Junction's facing. And I think finding ways to get through some of these personal issues to work together for the greater good. I mean, I've had a lot of people accuse me that, you know, you're running for city council, it's about the money. You're going to get rich off this.
Yeah, no.
I have to tell these people, say, it pays $500 a month. Like, most of these people are spending more money buying coffee for the community members than they're actually making doing city council.
Well, and the thought about it behind that would be that, yes, you are looking to make a profit for everyone in the Grand Valley, not just for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and just, we need to lift restrictions. We got to get out of our own way.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, I like that one.
We get out of our own way. We have the ability to actually see, you know, business grows. We hire employees. The more margin I have, the better I can pay my employees.
And the more housing can be afforded.
The more housing can be afforded. You know, we kind of have this idea that, you know, business owners and business people generally are these greedy, money-hungry people who live high up on the hill. I spoke to somebody about this the other day. You know, most of the people that are running businesses and owning businesses are your next door neighbors, who are just as worried about making payroll, who are just as worried about, you know, their mortgage payment. And yeah, they're able to keep things together at this place of employment, but life is just as hard for them. And we're not living in our ivory towers by any means.
Right.
You know, they're, especially, you know, with the construction and the resource center, you know, there's hard decisions that have to be made. You know, a lot of times we have to look at things and say, hey, do we pay our people or do we pay ourselves? And our people always get paid first.
Right.
So to treat that group of people like they're evil and they're not really trying to help, or they're not able to come together and find a greater good, I think is dishonest. I really do. I find there's so much more that the private sector has to offer, and that when government has the ability to step out of the way, we kind of watch that flourish. I think, I mean, even watching COVID, you watch, you know, it was a interesting time, but you watch what the private sector did. The private sector brought these medical professionals together that came together to work, you know, the greatest minds. And it took, you know, I'm not sure we got necessarily the best outcome, but it took an emergency to bring these people together. It's like, why can't we just come together and work on our problems on more of a regular basis, you know? The private sector working with these nonprofits to support these nonprofits, instead of it being, you know,
a competition.
Yeah.
You're competing with the city as a nonprofit, and you shouldn't be.
Absolutely. I spoke to somebody about that the other day, and they were talking about the road paving equipment that the city had purchased. And they said, you know, it's fine if you want to actually prove that you can do this more economically than we can, but you're not even factoring in all the different pieces to show that this is done right. You know, at the end of the day, we've got to get out of the private sector's way and support them. You know, we We don't want to be competing in housing. We don't want to be competing in construction. You know, we got to incentivize these people to do work in Grand Junction. You know, I've talked to people that talk about, you know, these different construction companies that if they can avoid working here, they will avoid our valley. They would rather do work up valley, these big projects, because it's just so hard to work here, between finding people to work and the actual costs and time frame it takes to accomplish these different projects. You know, you talk to a lot of these builders, the cost of money waiting on the permitting process that the city takes makes it so impossible to build anything slightly affordable. And then to make all these decisions in the name of affordability doesn't really seem all that honest. It's like, we need to cut red tape. We need to shorten the permitting process and start pushing things through. We don't need another firm to come in and tell us that we need to hire more people. We need to figure out why we're not being efficient and make some changes, just like any business would. You know, I know if we're not doing well at the car wash, it's on us to look internally and figure out where we're making mistakes, whether it be personnel, chemical, you know, something we're doing ourselves. We've got to make those changes, because the money's, if you're in that situation already, the money's already drying up.
Right.
So spending more money to solve a problem that you don't have the money to spend, it doesn't really get you anywhere.
Good point. And you do need businesses on city council, people from diverse backgrounds. And I think sometimes what they say is, well, you don't know enough about the process, and what's your background in all the committees you've served on, and it doesn't matter. It's like you said, it's common sense.
Common sense.
Everybody had to start somewhere.
Well,
And Jason said that when he was running, he kept, you know, Diane and Greg and other people had all the answers, but then he said, well, I don't know yet, but I will find out.
and there's something admirable about that too. You know, that little bit of vulnerability being, you know, hey, I don't have all the answers. You know, and
Nor you should have, because that's what's the problem right now.
yes.
Is the people think the governing body think they have all of the right answers.
Yeah.
And that is a problem.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yep. And that if they get ahead of it and push the buttons, they can kind of control the narrative ahead of time, instead of just kind of taking a step back and seeing how things kind of play out on their own. And this stuff tends to kind of even out on its own if you do leave it alone.
Water finds its own level.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I just taking that in, you know, having that ability to say, I don't know, but we have so and so in this community that does. You know, I can't tell you about zoning, but I can reach out to Shannon, or I can reach out to Keith Ellers and say, hey, is this something you guys know about? Like, having that ability as a city, I don't know about the unhoused. Can you call Sister Karen? Can you call Mona? You know, there's just so many people that have so much valuable information within this city that we could be fostering these relationships and building them, that, you know, when Mona or when Sister Karen has an idea for the next project, they can come to the city and be like, hey, we'd like to do this. What do you guys think? Instead of this situation where they feel like, well, maybe we can ask them for some money, but we've kind of got to figure this out on our own. I just think we can do a lot better at backing up the people in our community that really know Grand Junction, love Grand Junction.
Have done those things in Grand Junction.
Yes, absolutely.
Not from Denver, who don't know our market and don't know our people.
Absolutely. Well, and that are willing to, you know, look at tax dollars as a business. You know, I don't think we do that right now. Tax dollars are monopoly money. And we can spend on these projects and we'll figure it out in the future, and it doesn't really matter. You know, it's even like the 29 Road project, something that would have been really good for Grand Junction. It's hard to ask the community to take on debt when you are already being so irresponsible with the tax dollars that are being spent. But if the community sees you being responsible with these tax dollars, fostering them with actual pride, then the community is going to step up and vote those things like 29 Road through. And
If they see the benefit to themselves.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and we also won't have to ask for so much debt on them, because we'll have the general funds, because we haven't been spending on everything that pops up in front of us.
Right.
You know, it's, and even with these increased fees, I wonder, are we trying to keep up with what we've been doing, or are we trying to create this magical idea of the future that we can have all this city purchased infrastructure and these different things and parks and beautiful ideas, but it's maybe a little past what Grand Junction is or needs or wants or reflects as a community. I mean, we have to represent Grand Junction for what Grand Junction is, not what we think Grand Junction should be, or what we want it to be.
We have a lovely city, just not a storybook city.
Yeah.
That does not exist. And will not exist.
Exactly. And I look at things like the Whitman Park redesign. The city talking about spending $3.5 to $5 million on a park redesign that to me looks like it's to prove that the park wasn't closed because of the unhoused population. It's one of our nicest tree canopies in the entire valley. Why can't we just open the park up and police it?
Right.
We don't have to spend a fortune on it to show that it's, especially if we are looking at the future budget for the next 4 years and we see this huge deficit. Projects like that need to be, hey, it might be something we can do in the future, but we can't do it right now.
Right.
It's like me. I would love to buy more car washes. I would love to put in all the new, nicest equipment. But we have to grow sustainable. We have to grow safely. We can't get out over our skis because that never ends up well for anybody.
Right.
So realizing that it's like, yes, some of these things might be great ideas. Some of them also might be great ideas for tomorrow.
Right.
It doesn't all have to be done today. It doesn't all have to be pushed through at night. We can kind of wait and pump the brakes on some of this stuff.
Okay, last question, because I see Ruth going, it's getting long. Just your top 5
that
priorities.
makes a lot of sense.
5 priorities.
Housing affordability, and not just affordable housing. We've got to look at the entire spectrum of real estate in our valley. And we can't just say, hey, we want to focus so much on this income bracket, we're going to make it affordable for this income bracket. Because there's no way to actually really maintain that. It might be affordable through one phase and then it turns over and gets flipped for more money. Or there's lots of different issues that can come upon that affordability thing. But if you actually look at the cost of real estate as a whole for the entire of Grand Junction, and if you can cut those permitting fees, if you can bring down permitting times, if we can look closely at tap costs, I mean, different things that really, really add up quickly when you're building. Not only that, but the permitting time is just out of control. When you're asking an investor or a builder to pay expensive money on the money they've borrowed to purchase land while it just sits in the planning process, I mean, that just really it turns people away big time. It's not a great way to incentivize growth at all in our community. We need to open up Grand Junction for business. We need to create high-paying jobs that can actually sustain the level of real estate that we have here, instead of kind of what we're working on.
And we don't have to create the jobs. All we have to do is to create the environment that will draw people in, that provide those jobs.
Absolutely.
Instead of thinking, I have to do this. Just make it open. And
it's stepping out of the way of the Costco's and, figuring out what we actually have to do to close those deals, realizing that they also are going to bring in, 300 plus jobs, that the construction alone is going to be huge for the valley. Not to mention all the little feeder shops that are going to follow that, and how that area is going to completely and totally develop. I drive through Montrose and I wonder, why is half of this town brand new? And I drive through Grand Junction and I don't get that feeling. It's because Montrose is open for business. They want those businesses there. They're willing to incentivize those businesses to come to their community. And when we're losing business to them...
But not on the back of the person that's paying the taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their fees are so much lower than ours, because that's what we saw in the last thing, the impact fees. They said no.
Yeah, because they see that the money that this brings in, they see the sales tax revenue, they see, you look at the construction costs, how many times are those materials taxed? How many times are you going to actually win throughout that, that process? This brings money in, it actually grows our economy. So when you start saying we're going to increase the fees to offset that, all that does is shrinks the growth. It sends people to the county, it sends people to Fruita, Delta, Montrose, all the surrounding areas. Grand Junction even alone you can hit a lot of pockets of county.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a belter in Grand Junction, I'm belting in the county. County's great to deal with. They push things through. They don't mess around. They knock it out and knock it through. And why we have such a vast difference in some cases between a few hundred feet worth of property
Right.
is a real issue. So, I mean,
So affordability.
Yep.
What's your next one?
Public safety, I think, is a huge thing. Grand Junction, a lot of times, has become the training ground for police officers. And that turns out to be way more expensive than actually just retention. I look at it from the business aspect. They always say retaining employees is more cost effective than training a new hire.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Grand Junction's not doing that with our public safety. With our police and our firefighters, we are behind the curve on salary and compensation, benefits, all of it.
Okay, just a question on that.
Yeah.
So in our last election, do you remember that we voted on that to have so much
Yeah.
money?
And I think
Put
so
to
much
them.
of that created more positions, but I think it was less focused on the actual rising up of the current officer than it was creating more policing. And I don't necessarily think we need more policing. I think we need the best and the brightest. We need Grand Junction Police Department to be a career where somebody can spend their entire life working for them and retire well and be a great member, can afford to live here, be a great member of our community.
And see, and that's what I think people would if you don't make that distinction of what's the difference. We just spent money on that. What do you mean you want more money?
Yeah.
If you tell people why this would benefit, and maybe we don't need to tax you more, we just need to reallocate the money that we have.
Absolutely. We need to be more
I think
responsible.
it's kind of like you can kind of compare it to the weathermen that come in on all of the TV shows. I mean, they're here to begin.
Yeah.
And just the instant they get a little training, they're off to bigger markets. Same with our police force.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
makes a lot of sense.
And a lot of times because of that, I'm sorry, but you take a 25-year-old and you take a 45-year-old and you test their temperament, it's going to be quite a bit different.
Oh, yeah.
The 45-year-old has calmed down quite a bit over his last 20 years. The 25-year-old is still feeling kind of like an 18-year-old in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, because of that turnover, a lot of our officers are these younger guys. And don't get me wrong, I've got a great relationship with PD, and I think they do a great job with their hiring and training. But being able to keep these guys in the community is huge. When you start, years and years ago in Grand Junction, you used to see these career officers and you'd recognize them, a lot of them that have retired through GJPD, the Officer Donahues and those guys they're community fixtures. And I think we need that. If our money's focused on retention, training, equipment, the things that actually put them in a position to do their job efficiently and well, we're retaining officers, it's costing less, the community engagement increases because these officers have relationships with these people.
There are neighbors and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
So in that case, then we need affordable housing. We also need
Yeah.
we also need this and this and this.
Yeah.
So it all feeds into one
Together.
pool.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. My brother-in-law's a surgeon, and they had looked at coming into the Grand Valley, and they looked at the schools, they looked at the medical providers, and they didn't love Grand Junction, And if we're going to attract the top talent, if we want to bring people like that to Grand Junction, we need to kind of focus on, our schools have to kind of pick it up a little bit, and we got to get ahead of things on that front. And Grand Junction's becoming a place where people want to be. But teachers, doctors, it's kind of the same thing as the law enforcement on that front. Like if we want to be the best of the best in our community, if we want to retain the best of the best, we really got to take care of these people. And a big part of that is salaries versus cost of living. And one of those things has to give at some point, because we can't just continue on this trajectory and expect people to figure it out. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We end up with a situation where we want people here. We've got a great university who's turning out nurses and engineers and all sorts of great occupations, and people that they just can't afford to stay here. So they're having to move to their hometowns. They're having to move to places that are more cost effective, because there's not, once you move out of the dorms or you don't have a house to split with 4 buddies anymore, what do you do here?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
You don't want to split with 4 other married couples?
You know, and that's might be where we're moving here. Yeah.
So we've got 2.
That's 2. So safety, stuff like we talk about with the in-house community. I think our funds can be allocated far more effectively than they are now. And I think we need to find ways to measure that. If we're putting money into something, we need to show that money is being effective, and we need to see how many people our actual dollars are helping.
Okay.
Because that's an important thing. When you start looking at, how many people we're helping with this actual revenue, it's kind of like that EV car share program. $300,000 and we're going to help 60 people.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense because $300,000 could be used on a project that actually helps our entire community.
Right.
So looking at things like that and actually allocating funds responsibly, I think is really important. Kind of lost my train of thought on that one. I do apologize.
Well, no, that's good because we did spend quite a bit of time on the homeless, but the EV car shares and
yes.
allocating money that it's going to be the best spent for the entire community, and that's one of your goals too. I know is not just to benefit a small sector, but to have something that always benefits the entire community.
Absolutely.
As much as possible. I mean, there are things that are going to be just one.
Absolutely. And on the in-house side, I lost my train of thought. I kind of came back to it there. Just focusing on things, on programs that actually lift people up out of poverty. That give people hope, that show people that American dream is still alive in Grand Junction. It's really surprising how many people, when you actually start talking about the unhoused population in Grand Junction with different people working in different facilities, that actually tell you, oh, I used to be unhoused. I used to be homeless. It always catches me off guard a little bit because you don't really meet that many people that do break the cycle, or if you do, they aren't that quick to tell you about their worst time of their life. They want to be. But the more people that I meet that say, hey, I lived in my car for a year, I did that for a year, and then now I got this job and I was able to get into this, really putting those stories out to show people that you can rise above this, creating programs with job education, job placement, just general education, that we can show people, hey, we can put you in a trade, you might make $100K a year within 10 years. But right away you're probably going to make 45, and you're going to create a sustainable life for your family, and you're going to find a sense of pride in that work that you never really knew. You're going to learn a skill that you're probably going to do better than anybody else is going to do, and you're going to wear that around like a badge of honor that you never knew existed. And I think creating programs that give people that's really what we need to focus on. Instead of creating a system that just sustains it, we've got to lift people up.
I agree. So one last thing before I close this off. What is, how available will you be to people? Because Cody, I can't give him enough credit for doing Tuesdays, and he could do it a little later.
Yeah.
Tuesdays and Thursdays with Cody.
Absolutely.
She's not a morning person.
Yeah.
9 o'clock? Are you kidding me? But the 7:30 with the other guy, I'm like, with Mike, and I'm like, I'll go, but I don't want to. So do you have any plans for being available?
A big part of my thing is, I want to be a local voice. I want to really, truly be a bridge between council and the community. So every business card I give out has my cell phone on it. I want to be reachable. I actually want to, one thing that's kind of struck me throughout this process was, with the resource center was only 2 counselors wanted to truly engage me. Both tried to find solutions and help me, but one more than the other. But even with the one that still engaged me and didn't really want to find solutions, he still sat with me, listened with me, and we walked away feeling good about our conversations with each other. And so many of these people in our community just need that sit down. It might not even be the victory they're looking for, but to feel like your voice has been heard, I mean, it completely and totally can diffuse it.
And it does change you to know what do these people think? What do they want?
Yep. And we have stakeholders, and I give Grand Junction a lot of credit. We have stakeholders in this community that truly want to be involved. You know, a lot of communities, people don't really come out until it's pitchforks and torches, and then they are out in full force at that point.
Yeah.
Where Grand Junction, you know, I've been really fortunate with the business community that I've been part of, discussing the resource center, that everyone that speaks from a place of compassion, kindness. No one comes out and says, we don't want this here, we don't want it in our backyard. Everyone speaks about the problems that they're facing and different ways that we can solve those individual problems. And I think so much of that shows in Grand Junction. You see it with the stakeholder meeting for the fees as well, where all of these people are willing to donate their time and sit at a table and try to find a best route forward for the greater good. And I think we really need to foster that, because the longer we ignore people, the more they'll stop showing up. The mayor had made a comment at one meeting about the unhoused, that he was just really disappointed that all these people that had been standing up and speaking about this weren't present at that meeting that night. And all I could think was, well, you give them 3 minutes of public comment and then you never respond to what they have to say. Why would you expect someone to sit here? If they don't believe you truly listen, then they're not going to show up. But if you care and you listen, people will show up and they'll tell you the information you need to know. It's sitting back and listening. It's crazy, but that's a skill that I think is lost in a lot of ways. But it also leads you to the best outcome.
Agreed.
Yes.
Well, we've got to cut it short. So you've been watching Mesa County Compass. These are the facts as we know them, the truth as we see it. You decide. And thank you, Ben, and
very
good
much,
luck.
Ben.
Thank you
Good
both
luck.
so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome.